As dawn broke over northern France, the thunder of engines echoed through the fog. From the beaches of Normandy to the far edge of Patton's advance, a river of trucks surged forward, green machines roaring across torn landscapes, headlights blazing against the night. Each carried 5 tons of ammunition, fuel, or food. Each carried the hope of an army that refused to slow down. They called it the Red Ball Express, a one-way highway stretching hundreds of miles, pulsing with motion 24 hours a day. It was not born in a boardroom, but in desperation, when every rule of logistics said, stop. America answered, go faster. Nearly 23,000 men drove these trucks, and 3 out of every 4 were African-American soldiers' men who could not eat in the same restaurants as white soldiers, yet now carried the lifeblood of the U.S. Third Army. They painted names on their vehicles: Hitler, Here We Come; Detroit to Berlin Express; Patton's Blood Bank. Their courage had no uniform color. The German generals mocked American logistics as chaotic and undisciplined. To them, war was a science of precision and restraint. They could not understand a system built on excess, improvisation, and sheer human will. But the United States had discovered a new truth about modern war, that in an age of machines, the side that moves faster wins. Within 3 days, the impossible became inevitable. Patton's tanks pierced the German lines at the Seine. Within a week, Paris was free. Within a month, the Third Army stood at the gates of Germany. And it all began with a convoy, an endless line of engines rolling toward history at 35 miles an hour. In August 1944, the German General Staff still believed in mathematics. They trusted in charts, in fuel consumption tables, in the cold arithmetic of distance and supply. From their perspective, the American advance across France defied every known law of war. 400 miles separated General Patton's spearhead from the beaches of Normandy. Every mile meant more fuel, more food, more ammunition, and more risk. German intelligence reported that an armored division required 150,000 gallons of fuel per day. No army in history had ever sustained such a pace for more than a week. To the Germans, this was not arrogance. It was certainty. They had seen it themselves on the vast steppes of Russia, where the mightiest panzer divisions had slowed to a crawl, not from enemy fire, but from empty fuel tanks. General Alfred Jodl, sitting beneath the iron chandeliers of Hitler's headquarters, believed history was about to repeat itself. He imagined the thunder of Patton's tanks fading to silence somewhere on the roads of France, their crews stranded beside motionless steel giants, waiting for supplies that would never come. The Americans, he said, advance like gamblers. Their luck will end before September. But the Americans were not relying on luck. They were relying on something far greater, a system of logistics that German doctrine had never conceived. A network so vast and audacious that it made mockery of traditional military logic. While Jodl calculated limitations, the Americans were already removing them. While the Wehrmacht counted gallons and tons, the Red Ball Express was preparing to make arithmetic irrelevant. The German generals believed that no army could outrun its supplies. They were right until the United States proved them wrong. For generations, German officers had been trained to worship precision. Their manuals taught that discipline was strength, that order was invincible, that waste was defeat. They planned every movement, measured every liter of fuel, and mapped every bridge before a single tank rolled forward. To them, war was a science, not a storm. So when reports reached Berlin that American convoys were driving with headlights on at night, that trucks were running 20 hours a day, that no spacing or camouflage discipline existed, the reaction was disbelief, even laughter. No army violates every rule and survives, one colonel remarked. But the Americans did more than survive, they accelerated. Where German logistics relied on scarcity, the Americans built on abundance. Where Germans repaired old engines, Americans replaced them. Where Germans conserved tires, Americans burned through thousands each week. And where the Wehrmacht feared failure, the Red Ball Express planned for it, accepting mechanical losses as part of its rhythm, not a flaw in its system. It was a new kind of warfare, not elegant, not efficient, but unstoppable. From the beaches of Cherbourg to the front lines near the Seine, 6,000 trucks rolled in an endless circuit. 2 parallel highways, one eastbound, one westbound, formed the arteries of an army in motion. Every 5 minutes, a new convoy thundered forward. Maintenance teams repaired engines on the roadside in 15 minutes or less. And above all, there was one unbreakable rule: do not stop. To German eyes, it was madness. To American commanders, it was genius. Logistics was no longer a background function, it had become a weapon. Each truckload of fuel was as vital as a tank, each driver as important as a rifleman. The Red Ball Express was not just a supply system. It was America's industrial heart beating across the battlefields of Europe, a heart the Germans could neither comprehend nor silence. In a commandeered chateau near the French town of Le Mans, a young lieutenant colonel named Laurent Ayres stood before a room of exhausted officers. Maps covered the walls, dotted with red arrows stretching deep into occupied France. The figures on the board told a grim truth. Patton's Third Army was burning fuel faster than any supply system could deliver it. Every plan, every model, every rule said the same thing: stop advancing. Ayres looked up and said, "Gentlemen, we are not going to stop. We're going to build a one-way highway to victory." It was August 25th, 1944. In less than 48 hours, that impossible idea became reality. They called it the Red Ball Express, borrowing the name from America's old railroad term for priority freight. 6,000 trucks were gathered from every corner of France, mostly the 2.5-ton GMCs, nicknamed the Deuce and a Half. They formed a ceaseless chain that stretched from the Normandy beaches to the forward lines. Each truck carried 5 tons of ammunition, fuel, or food. Each truck was driven by men who barely slept, many barely trained, yet refused to fail. The numbers defied imagination. Every 24 hours, 12,500 tons of supplies rolled east. Every 5 minutes, a new convoy departed. Military police cleared roads, mechanics rode along with spare engines, and breakdowns were fixed in minutes, or shoved off the road so the column never stopped. But what made the Red Ball Express truly extraordinary was not just its scale, it was who drove it. Nearly 75% of the drivers were African American soldiers, men from Georgia, Mississippi, Michigan, and New York, who had grown up in a segregated America, now driving side by side toward freedom in Europe. They could not eat in the same restaurants as white soldiers back home, yet they were feeding the army that was liberating a continent. They named their trucks with pride and humor: Hitler's Freight Service, Detroit to Berlin Express, Patton's Blood Bank. They drove through exhaustion, rain, shellfire, and disbelief. Every mile they conquered was a victory over both tyranny abroad and prejudice at home. By August 28th, German reconnaissance reported something they had never seen before: a continuous column of vehicles, headlights blazing for 20 kilometers, rolling day and night without pause. One German officer wrote in astonishment, "The enemy has created a supply system beyond comprehension. They do not hide, they do not stop. They have turned the road itself into a weapon." And he was right. The Red Ball Express was not just delivering fuel and ammunition, it was delivering momentum. At first, the German command refused to believe the reports. Reconnaissance pilots described convoys stretching beyond the horizon, headlights blazing like a river of fire. Artillery observers reported movement so constant it seemed mechanical, a machine that never slept. General Heinz Guderian dismissed it as exaggeration. "No army can advance 60 miles a day," he said. "Engines alone would fail." But the engines did not fail. They were replaced, repaired, reinvented. The Red Ball Express defied every prediction, every calculation, every lesson of German military science. Within 72 hours, Patton's tanks had smashed through the German lines along the Seine. Within 1 week, Paris was free. By September, the Third Army stood at Germany's border, supplied not by railroads or depots, but by 6,000 roaring trucks. From East Prussia, the intelligence summaries read like confessions of disbelief. "The Americans violate every principle of warfare," wrote one general. "They waste vehicles, abandon them, burn fuel like water. Yet somehow they move faster every day." Field Marshal Walter Model stared at the reports and muttered, "If these numbers are true, we are not facing a superior army. We are facing a superior civilization." The truth was inescapable. Germany's science of efficiency had met America's art of abundance, and efficiency lost. For the first time in the war, the Germans felt something new: exhaustion without hope. They could hear the convoys at night, the deep drone of engines that never stopped. Each sound meant more shells, more food, more fuel, and fewer chances for survival. Wehrmacht soldiers began calling it the Iron River. They said it flowed all night, carrying death eastward and freedom westward. One captured German officer said it best: "We knew we had lost when we understood your supply system. You violate every rule, waste everything, exhaust your men, yet you win. You have industrialized war beyond our comprehension." To the Germans, trucks were transport. To the Americans, they were weapons rolling cannons of fuel and steel that turned mobility into dominance and logistics into strategy. They were young men from Georgia, Alabama, Detroit, and Chicago mechanics, porters and farmers before the war, now wearing the olive-drab uniform of a country that still did not see them as equals. 75% of the Red Ball Express drivers were African-American soldiers. They were denied combat roles, barred from officers' mess halls, and told by their own country that they were fit only to serve, not to lead. Yet it was their hands, steady, blistered, and unshakable, that kept the engines of victory running across Europe. They drove 20 hours a day, through rain, fog, and enemy fire. Many took pills to stay awake. Some never woke again. More than 300 drivers died in accidents along the Red Ball route, their trucks overturned, burned, or buried in mud. But the convoys never stopped. They painted words of defiance across their vehicles. Hitler's freight service, the Lord's Prayer Express, Patton's blood bank. Every slogan was a declaration that history would remember them, even if the army refused to. They created their own code of survival. Slow trucks pulled aside immediately. Breakdowns were shoved into ditches. No man was left behind unless the mission demanded it. It was raw, improvised, and brutally efficient, the very opposite of the German ideal. And yet it worked better than anything the Wehrmacht had built. At night, when the convoys roared through liberated French towns, children would run to the roadside, waving and cheering. The drivers threw them chocolate, gum, and soap, small miracles in a country that had known only hunger. To the French, these men were heroes. To the Germans, they were a mystery. To America, they were invisible. But General Dwight D. Eisenhower saw them. During a visit to the Red Ball Express, he stood silently as convoys passed. "These men," he said quietly, are winning the war as surely as any infantry. In that moment, history shifted. The road to freedom was being driven not just toward Berlin, but toward equality. For those men, every mile was a protest. Every delivery was a promise that one day, the nation they fought for would finally fight for them. By the autumn of 1944, the Red Ball Express had become more than a supply line. It was a living organism, a network that thought, adapted, and evolved faster than the enemy could react. Every rule of logistics had been rewritten on the roads of France. German intelligence officers struggled to understand how it worked. They drew charts, estimated capacities, and tried to predict failure points. Every time they found one, the Americans moved the goalposts. When roads broke, engineers built bypasses overnight. When trucks burned out, replacements rolled off ships the next morning. When distances doubled, new fuel depots appeared every 25 miles. The Germans called it industrial madness. The Americans called it Tuesday. In war, the Germans believed victory came from maneuver and firepower. For the Americans, it came from motion. Every tank, every gun, every battalion was only as powerful as the truck that supplied it. The Red Ball Express turned logistics into the very engine of war. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, commander of all German forces in the West, studied the reports for days. Finally, he told his staff, "The Americans have made distance irrelevant. Our strategy assumed they would outrun their supplies. That point no longer exists." That realization was catastrophic. German defenses, built around the idea of delay and exhaustion, collapsed in weeks. Every time a line was drawn, it was erased by speed. Historians would later call it the triumph of industrial democracy over totalitarian discipline. Where the Wehrmacht demanded obedience, the Red Ball Express demanded initiative. Sergeants made decisions faster than German colonels. Mechanics became field commanders. Drivers became strategists. Chaos, which should have been America's weakness, became its greatest weapon. In the end, Germany was defeated not just by tanks and planes, but by a civilization that had learned to turn factories into firepower, assembly lines into arteries of war, and logistics into strategy itself. When the guns finally fell silent in Europe, the highways of France still bore the scars of the Red Ball Express. Ruts carved deep into the earth by 6,000 trucks that refused to stop. Bridges rebuilt in haste still stood as monuments to motion. And along those roads lay the ghosts of men who drove through exhaustion, through fire, through disbelief, so that others could march forward to victory. The Red Ball Express ended after 82 days. But in that brief moment, it had delivered 412,000 tons of supplies, shortened the war by 6 months, and proved that in World War II, logistics was not support. It was strategy. In World War II, victory did not belong only to those who fired the guns, but to those who kept the guns firing. To those who fought fascism, not with bullets, but with steering wheels. To those who turned the engines of democracy into the heartbeat of freedom. And in World War II, it was the courage of ordinary men, especially those who were told they were less than equal, that revealed the true measure of America's strength. General Patton would later write, "The truck drivers of the Red Ball Express deserved as much credit for the defeat of Germany as any combat unit." He was right, because it was their wheels that carried freedom across Europe, their engines that drowned out the laughter of German generals, and their determination that proved industrial democracy could outlast totalitarian precision. Today, as we remember the thunder of those trucks rolling toward history, we must ask ourselves, what will we fight for now? Will we fight for peace, for justice, for the dignity of every person? Or will we allow silence to erase their legacy? The men of the Red Ball Express answered that question with every mile they drove. They fought for a world where courage mattered more than color, where unity mattered more than pride, and where freedom once earned must never be forgotten. So as their engines fade into memory, let us keep their spirit alive. Let us drive forward together. Fight for peace, fight for justice, fight for freedom, because the road they built still leads us there.